What if I told you that most people who live to 80 actually stop growing at 24? Not physically, not in years, but in every way that actually matters. They age for another 50 years, but they never really level up again. Imagine just for a second that you are watching an old video game. Maybe it's one of those open world RPGs from the early 2000s. You're walking through a town and you see a non-playable character, an NPC. Let's say it's a generic villager. He's programmed to walk from the market to his house, but something goes wrong. A glitch happens. He gets stuck in a corner. His legs are moving furiously. He's running at full sprint. He looks like he's exerting maximum effort, but because he's hitting an invisible geometry wall, he isn't moving an inch. To him, inside the code, he thinks he's traveling. But to you, the player holding the controller, it's just a sad loop. He's sweating, he's trying, but he's just wearing out the carpet. I had a conversation with ChatGPT about human development. I asked it a question. If life were structured like those old Pokemon games, where everyone starts at level 1 and theoretically could reach level 100, what would the average person's progression actually look like? The answer suggested that most of us are walking around thinking we're somewhere in the 50s or 60s of life's progression, when really we soft-capped ourselves decades ago, and we've just been replaying the same level ever since. Here's what Chat mapped out, and it's fascinating how universal the early levels are. Think of those first years of life as the boot sequence. Level 1, you're born. That's it. You exist, breathe, cry, survive. Level 2, you walk. Suddenly you've unlocked independent movement. Level 3, you talk, language becomes available. Level 4, you learn basic obedience. And level 5, you recognize yourself, the first flicker of I exist. None of this requires choice. It's automatic XP. Everyone passes through these gates because biology carries you through them. Then comes what Chat called the tutorial zone, roughly ages 4 through 12. You learn rules, you learn punishment, you learn to compare yourself to others. And here's where something subtle happens. You learn to seek external validation, and you develop a fear of being wrong. The tutorial's hidden message is clear. Do what you're told, and you'll be safe. Levels 10 through 14, the teenage years, are what Chat described as stat allocation without instructions. You're handed points to distribute, but nobody explains the game. Puberty hits, identity confusion sets in, you align with groups, you question authority, but only partially, and then, at level 18 or so, you're asked to choose your future, while essentially blindfolded. Most people, according to Chat, massively misallocate their stats here. They overinvest in approval, they underinvest in agency, and they almost completely ignore courage. Then comes early adulthood, levels 15 through 19 in the realistic scale, first real independence, money awareness, routine, formation, and here's where the critical fork appears. A small minority keeps exploring, keeps pushing into discomfort, but most people lock in habits. They find comfort preferences, and something crystallizes. What Chat identified next was a soft cap, usually hitting around level 20 to 24 on the realistic scale, somewhere in the mid to late 20s in age. This is where identity crystallizes. Career tracks get chosen, social scripts get accepted, risk avoidance becomes dominant. And then Chat said M people never pass level 24 in real terms. They may age to 80, but they don't level. They accumulate years, not growth. The game doesn't impose the ceiling. It's self-built. Brick by brick, people construct a belief that says, this is who I am, and that belief becomes a wall. Not because growth isn't possible, but because they stop choosing the battles that grant experience points. Imagine a role-playing game where your character stops accepting quests. The world is still full of dungeons, still full of challenges that would push you to the next level, but your character just stays in the village, tends the same garden, has the same conversations, the game keeps running, time keeps passing, but the experience bar stops moving. Imagine a player who refuses to leave the starting village because the monsters outside are scary. So to feel like they're progressing, they decide to become the world's greatest expert at arranging the furniture in their starter house. They get really, really good at it. They level up their interior design skill to 99, but their courage stat stays at 5. Their resilience stays at 3. Chat broke down what happens after this soft cap into 3 paths. The first is the group that never tries again. They accept the map. Growth becomes something theoretical, something other people do. They stabilize. No spikes, no drops. Flat XP forever. The second path is the rare few who devote themselves to leveling. They seek discomfort regularly, build systems for growth, and willingly reset their identity again and again. These are the outliers. But the third path, Chat suggested, is where most people actually live, the occasional strivers. They try sometimes. Not never, but not consistently. And this is where something insidious happens. These occasional strivers don't actually level up. They simulate leveling, a spike of motivation, a short burst of effort, a brush with discomfort, then a retreat, then a story to explain why it didn't work out. Back to baseline. Repeat. Chad identified 4 reasons why occasional trying doesn't work. First, these people treat leveling as an event instead of a state. They wait for motivation. They plan to start after something else happens. But experience points only come from repeated exposure, not bursts. Second, they retreat at the first identity threat. They don't quit because it's hard. They quit because continuing might reveal something uncomfortable about themselves. So they stop just before the threshold. Third, and this one hit me, they confuse insight with experience points. They read, they reflect, they understand, and they mistake clarity for progress. But insight without action grants 0 XP. Understanding that you should change is not the same as changing. And fourth, they reset the same quest over and over. The gym restart, the business idea, the dating effort, the creative push, always from level 1 of the same quest. They never stack attempts long enough to unlock the next tier. I pushed back on Chat here. I said, look, plenty of people at 90 could point to real growth between 24 and the end. A new skill, a job promotion, parenting. It wasn't nothing. Chat agreed, but with a crucial correction. He called this punctuated leveling, not a staircase. Long plateaus with sudden jumps, usually forced, usually narrow, usually unplanned. People don't train for growth. Growth happens to them. Someone might slowly level up in their craft over decades, or in diet, or in technical skill, but only there. Their courage, their emotional honesty, their willingness to risk, all frozen at 25. So they feel both. I've grown a lot and I'm strangely stuck. Both are true. When Chad imagined what an honest 90-year-old might say, looking back at each phase of life, it was sobering. At 25 to 35, I thought I was building a life. Mostly I was building stability. At 35 to 50, I got better at what I already did. I didn't become broader. At 50 to 65, I stopped challenging my limits. I called it wisdom. Here's what makes this different from measuring wealth or strength or any external metric. With money, you can look left and see you have $10 while someone else has 10 billion. The scoreboard is obvious. But with personal growth, with this abstract sense of your own level, there's no shared definition of what level 100 even looks like. No visible XP bar, no agreed stat weights. So Chad pointed out something uncomfortable. Most people don't ask, am I actually leveling? They ask, does my story still make sense to me? And the difference between those two questions explains almost everything. Because when the scoreboard is abstract, most people quietly invent one that flatters the way they already live. People don't lie about their level. Chat made that clear. They do something more subtle. They change the definition of leveling to match where they stop being willing to feel fear. That's the quiet, universal mechanism. Progress in one narrow domain becomes evidence of total growth. I eat healthier now becomes I'm more evolved. I know more about my craft becomes I've matured. Meanwhile, the hard conversations remain undone. The risks remain untaken. The fear boundaries remain exactly where they were at 25. But those aren't counted anymore because the scoreboard has been rewritten. Most people don't fail because they stop trying. They fail because they try just often enough to never let go and never go all in. And if someone at 90 were forced to give an honest numerical level, without ego, without the comfortable story, Chat suggested they wouldn't say they reached 70. They'd say something like, I reached the mid-20s overall, with some parts of me at 40 and some still stuck at 18. So, why does this matter? Right now the controller is in your hand, and the screen is showing you a very convincing illusion. It feels like you're moving. You went to work today, you answered emails, you felt busy, you felt tired. Surely that effort counts for something. But remember the glitch. Remember that villager from the beginning, the one running full speed into the invisible wall, legs pumping, sweat pouring, exhausted from the effort, convinced in his own code that he is on a great journey from the market to his home. To him, the running feels like progress, the exhaustion feels like proof of travel. But if you could pull the camera back, if you could see your life from the perspective of a true level 100, you might see something that stops your heart. You might see that you're running at full speed, doing everything right, exhausting yourself every single day, but you haven't actually moved out of that corner in 40 years. The game doesn't end when you die. The game ends when you stop checking if you're actually moving.